I carry this extraordinary experience and privilege of having been a first witness to the legacy of Nelson Mandela.
Meet Zelda Le Grange, the former private secretary of the late great Nelson Mandela.
Madiba read 5 newspapers every single day, and it's the same news in all 5 papers. But he wanted to see how different people interpret things differently. And if you do that, you come to a different understanding.
What do you think he wanted for the ones around him?
Madiba always believed also that charity doesn't have to cost money. It can be just to check up on someone that you care about or someone that may be lonely. And that was the establishment of Mandela Day. That was the idea behind that. Every day we can do one good deed at least, and it doesn't have to cost money.
Zelda, you have quite a journey thus far. I would like to start off the podcast by asking you if someone you had just met comes up to you and says, "Hey, how would you introduce yourself and describe yourself to that person?"
Well, I think the first thing I would say to that person is that I'm a South African. For me, that's the most important thing. And secondly, I'll tell them that I'm, part of a group that carries a burden of the history of this country. But I'm a proud citizen today of where we are as a country, and I'm optimistic about the future. And then I'll tell them, of this life-changing experience I've had, because it was 19 years of my life. And even after that, the last couple of years, the last 11 years, I've spoken about Madiba so often. So, that the 11 years gets added.
And for the context of this conversation, how long were you working with Mr. Mandela?
So I worked for President Mandela between October 1994 to December 2013 when he passed away. So it's 19 years, a few days, 19 years, just over 19 years.
That's incredible. And I usually begin these podcasts by, trying to understand the early childhood of my guest. So, pre-1990, what is that environment like for you growing up? And, what stories were you told? And the analogy I like to use is, if I was a fly on the wall, what stories would I have heard from your parents, from the ones around you?
Well, I think the stories were all dominated by fear. I think, if you grew up in the 70s and 80s in South Africa, the news that you consumed, your syllabus at school, the curriculum at school, what you heard in church, it was all dominated by fear, in support of apartheid. So that is also how my family lived. And, we were supporters of apartheid because it served our privilege, of course. Not knowing at the time, but it's inconceivable now for people to understand. But when censorship is that rife in a society where you only get fed what the government wants you to believe, there's no reason for you to question what's happening outside of the borders of your community. We are like sheep as people, so we follow eagerly and in support of the propaganda that was fed to us every day. So that was a normal life in the Le Grange household. My parents both had jobs which most black parents didn't have. We had a good medical facility, a fairly good public school system.
And you use the term fear and a fear-based outlook and perhaps feeling. Leading up to 1990, when in 1990 when Mandela was released, was that feeling still? Did it carry on? Was there still fear? And what is the kind of environment like in 1990?
Yes, absolutely. Because remember, fear was used as a means for us to get us to support apartheid. Fear for the unknown, fear for anything and everyone that looks different than you, that prays differently than you, that behaves different than you, and that racial segregation really. So it was always that fear that if there's a new government or if there's democracy in South Africa, then there would be a civil war, and there would be retaliation for years of oppression. So that fear was very, very present every single day. And in 1990, when Madiba was released, when Madiba was released, I was just swimming in our pool, and my father actually warned me, and he said to me, we are in trouble now. So for me, that also the warning on his face was that we expected the worst of South Africa.
That's super interesting. And fast forward to 1994, was the feeling very similar, 4 years later when Mandela was actually elected as the president?
Absolutely, that fear continued, and even in small pockets today, it continues. It is used as a means to get people to do certain things by many political parties, by the way. So, in 1994, we still expected that now that the ANC was taking over and that there's a new and a black government, that there would be retaliation and there would be severe oppression, and we expected our country to break down in civil war at any point. We were on knife's edge. I remember, the day of the elections in 1994. I was working at the Department of State Expenditure, if you can believe that there was ever a department called that. And I drove to the office that day first to go and work, to put in some extra time because we had many challenges at work. And I remember the military vehicles on every street corner, of course, protecting the white people, because now there's an election today. We don't know what to expect. And I remember that feeling of fear and anticipation of what was going to happen. And when President Mandela was sworn in, I don't remember that we were particularly happy about him. It was still, it dominated our lives that this unexpected terrain is before us, and our future is in question as white Afrikaners in South Africa.
And when did it change for you? What was that point at which that feeling of fear, perhaps changed to a more abundance and acceptance of, the situation and what was going on?
I don't think there's a day and date, that I can name where this all changed for me. It was more like a process. Of course, when I first met President Mandela, and I went home and reported to my parents that this person is not the person we think he is. He surprised me with his charisma, with his kindness, and I felt respected, undeservingly so, in that first moment when I met him. And that was surprising to all of us. And slowly, as the president did small things, arranging to meet with the wives of all the former struggle heroes, but also including wives of former presidents of South Africa, from the apartheid era. When he started doing those things, he created a relatedness amongst people, and I think that created some ease and for people, to see a possible future at that stage. So it took a few months, and then I think it was in 1995, beginning 1995. It may have been with the ANC's anniversary in January 1995. I attended an ANC rally for the first time in my life, of course, with the president, and Beryl Baker, who was working for the president at the time, ensured that I went along. And just as a spectator, not as a worker that day, I wanted to also see, what was happening at these rallies and so on. And I remember standing in that stadium, one of only a very, very few white people. And I remember that feeling of joy, actually, that I felt in that moment, because people waved and they smiled at me and they were so welcoming. And I realized that all these preconceptions that I had over the years were created with a specific plan, and as specific, what's the word I'm looking for? There was a plan to all of it. And yes, and my preconceived ideas about things and about people was so wrong. And I think that started this process of undoing that fear that I was captured by for so many years.
And, working for the president at the time, you were essentially his number two, right? Because if you think about like the responsibilities and, the the day-to-day that you had to do, which you described in your books. Was there any point at which doubt creeped in for you, for one, accepting the position? And, of course, you were also faced with some scrutiny from others. So was there any doubt that you may have made a wrong decision?
Look, for the first 4 years of my time with President Mandela, I was working in his office, and I wasn't his private secretary. I was first, just a secretary, and then I became an assistant private secretary. So I always had, that buffer between me and the world of the more senior person, Mary Kladana, then Virginia Engel. I was surrounded by people that made me feel safe as well. And then after Madiba's retirement, when I was the only one working for him and the only private secretary then, there were many occasions where I felt that I may have made a big mistake, but not because of politics and not because of the president, but because of the environment and the complexities that come with an environment and the pressure that comes in an environment like that. So on many occasions, I wanted to leave every single day, actually. And, it was just overwhelming, and the pressure was relentless. And then the next morning I would arrive in his in the president's Madiba's office then, and see him smile and being greeted with such love and care. And then I realized, no, I'm not leaving. I'm going to stick it out. So, I also started thinking about what Madiba went through in prison and how he remained hopeful. And I think that also inspired me to hold on to hope that things will get better and we will, get through the most difficult situation. So there's a lot of lessons that I could have that I learned from him to keep me standing in that position. There was a lot of criticism, and there still is a lot of criticism to this day. But I also had to realize and come to terms with the fact that I didn't choose myself. Madiba chose me. And I had a job to do, and there will be many opinions about how I did my job, and it's fine. People are allowed their opinions. I had to make peace with the fact that I served Madiba in a capacity of being an aid to him, of always having his interest at heart, and that duty I can live with myself today, knowing that I did that duty to the best of my ability, irrespective of the criticism that came. So I don't think, if I look at my peers at influential and famous and celebrity-like people all over the world, this type of position is always, in the firing line, and there will always be criticism, no matter who you are or what you represent. There will always be criticism. So it's something I had to learn to live with.
Yes, this is a really good point that you brought up, because I feel like, as you mentioned, a lot of people who have a platform are, of course, going to be exposed to, the good, but mostly the bad. And of course, the bad coming from perhaps envy, jealousy, in people's own insecurities that gets projected onto you. You've had a bit of a, I guess, controversial takes on Twitter. And then there was some backlash when you did the TEDx talk, fast forward a bit in your journey. But once more, how did you deal with everything that was coming your way?
Well, at the time, it was a very difficult thing for me to go through, because, if you're attacked on Twitter by faceless and nameless people, there's no way you can actually defend yourself. But it posed a very important lesson for me, and I learned a lot from it. And, so looking back at that whole experience now, I've tried to turn the bad into good. By sharing, my own thoughts and feelings about the process, and also, making Madiba's legacy again relating to this modern world where we find ourselves in the firing line, no matter who you are, no matter what you do. At any point in time, you could be at the receiving end of the cancel culture. So, what do you do from it and how do you learn from it, for me, is more important. And I've had to come to terms also with the fact that there will always be that association between me and Madiba. And whatever I say and do comes with a responsibility. But that took time, and it took this experience for me to learn from that.
I feel like there's a point in which, each individual gets pushed either to react in a way that's very harmful, or to essentially as you did, I call it the more mature way to do things, emotionally mature way to do things, which is, not react and accept that it comes with the territory. But I feel like
Yeah.
it's such a fine line to get to that other side. Like, what have you learned from actually letting things go, accepting the situation? And another analogy that I like to use is not letting the water in.
Absolutely, you are right. There is a very fine line. The best advice that Professor Jakes Gerwel, who was Madiba's chief advisor, the best advice he ever gave me was to do absolutely nothing. And at the time, I was when we worked together, I was very frustrated at times because things didn't happen at the pace that I wanted them to happen. And then I wanted to push things, and then he would say to me, "Do nothing; it will sort itself out." And it took me that Twitter experience again for me to learn that. So because it's like your parents tell you things throughout your life, but you only actually pay attention to the things, when you are much older, when there is that maturity that sets in. So, no, I don't read all the comments on, everywhere where there's a comment about me. I choose who I engage with. And I'm not going to be silenced because of this experience. I do feel that in certain circumstances, your voice is important. But your choice of words is as important, because I think we live in South Africa, and not to be politically correct, but to be sensitive to people, to be sensitive to our environment and our history is very, very important when you engage with people. You also have to consider that other people come with their own life experiences, and people are hurt from many different things. I'm hurt from many different things, but we never sit and talk about those things because we are very superficially communicating on social media. So you cannot expect someone who expresses that hurt towards you to know what you are feeling, as I cannot know what that person has been through and his or her experiences. So it's a Twitter and, well, social media in general is a recipe for misunderstanding and for creating this environment where people can be shamed and blamed for almost anything. So you need to be sensitive. And again, I say not politically correct, because sometimes you have to say the unpopular things, because that's how we got to our democracy, by people saying the unpopular things.
Yeah, such a good point. I think also mention something that is important, which is, we expect empathy from others to understand what we're going through, but we don't give the same to others. It's a two-way street. What we want is what we should also give out.
And I think that was what Madiba was very good at, Nelson, is that he entered a situation and he entered circumstances expecting the best of everyone and anyone that stood in front of him. Removing all these layers that defines people, your worst mistake or your best achievement, but just connecting to the human being. Unfortunately, on social media, that's not possible, because you know nothing about the person when they just comment. So I think we can learn from Madiba's legacy and from the lessons that he taught us, that if we just approach each other with the same kind of compassion and empathy that we expect from others, then it will just be a much more pleasant exercise for us to engage with strangers on social media. Of course, it's not going to happen, but I also say that I can't change the landscape of social media. I can just control myself. So not to jump on a bandwagon and start canceling people because they've said something that I find offensive.
Yeah, the Stoics say that we can't control how others feel and what they do, but we can control how we react and how we approach others.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of the golden rule. I feel like we become a product of our environment. And there's research that shows you become the 5 people that you surround yourself with and hang out the most. And I'm pretty sure that being exposed to Mandela for all those years, it's almost this positive infectious personality that he had. Like I'm just assuming things, but you can't help but be better. Like, how instrumental was that?
I think, Nelson, to a great extent, that has been imprinted in my life. I think also my mother has got a very similar kind of attitude towards life, always seeing the good in people. But we are creatures of contradiction, and Madiba wasn't always good, and Madiba wasn't a saint. He always said that, don't consider me a saint unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying. So, he could get upset about things. He could be very stubborn. He was a complex character, and of contradiction, but he tried every single day. I think he woke up every single morning deciding, and making a conscious decision that today I'm going to be the best version of myself and see how I can better the world. And it is a decision to make. I can also sit and complain about everything that's wrong around me, but I try and see the good. So yes, it is definitely something that he left with me, and it doesn't feel forced. I find myself in many situations where I feel sometimes I also need to say something about something negative, but then I withhold myself because it doesn't contribute to the psyche of other people, because now I'm just joining the complaint train, as I call it. So there's so much good happening around us, and if we focus on that, it enhances. It's good for your own mental health as well. And of course, it's always necessary to be realistic about the circumstances. I am not toxically positive. I do have worries about certain things, and I do have concerns about certain things. But I don't make it other people's problems. I try and internalize it and work it myself out. I think that is the thing that Madiba gave me, is to be able to look at things from so many different angles. Always seeking divergence, always seeking different opinions, where today we just shut people down when they have a difference in opinion with us. And it's not right. We should be able to listen to people with different opinions, because that helps us understand things. Madiba read 5 newspapers every single day, and it's the same news in all 5 papers. But he wanted to see how different people interpret things differently. And if you do that, you come to a different understanding. And for me, that's very important, to not shut down difference of opinion and people who have very different views on things than I do.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Perspective. I think that's what I'm getting from that is, being very informed about what's going on, but then having almost this bird's eye view to then, make a decision. And that could be, with the smallest things in life, like choosing what you're going to put into your body and eat today compared to like, what you want to do with your life from a career point of view. I feel like that's such a good point to have that perspective and almost look at things from a holistic point of view. And I feel like, we grow up very small and in a bubble. And unless we're exposed to the people, the experiences that allows us to expand that bubble, we're going to live our life very small. And I think that was a huge challenge, in my family. And of course, like, speaking for others that I know, for you, what was that process like to kind of break out the bubble? Was it surrounding yourself with different people? Was it actually learning things and then applying? What is it for you?
I think for me, it was learning to give everybody a fair chance. The way a person looks, or as I said earlier, the way a person prays, or their education or their status in life, actually nothing matters. And, the way you approach a person, Madiba said, will determine how that person treats you. And for me, that was a very important lesson, because that changed how I treated or approached people in life. I was surrounded in the presidency, and even after the presidency, I was surrounded by highly intellectual people who look and do very different from me. And I had to open myself to that experiences and undo my superiority complex, that I've learned from a very young age because of the color of my skin. If you get challenged intellectually by people, and of course, I'm not an academic and an analyst and all kinds of things, but the kind of conversations you hear from people around you, and then the people are all from a different race and from a different religion, it opens your eyes. But you have to, I'm very fortunate that I had this experience, and my views were open, or my life was open to all of that. But we need to seek that, because people who do not have that kind of experience where they thrive in diversity will never learn the wonderful things that other cultures and other diverse groups can actually teach you. So, one of the things that I also discuss in my latest book, What Nelson Mandela Taught Me, was about learning the art of listening. And it's something that we are particularly bad at the moment because of our smartphones. We don't, people don't read any longer for comprehension. They just read headlines. They don't read the whole story. So you think you're knowing what's going on just because you read the headlines. But that is a thing that I learned from Madiba and from the Xhosa culture, where his first childhood memory was about learning the art of listening. As a young boy, he was allowed in his tribe to attend meetings of the elders, which was very out of the ordinary those days. But he witnessed that the leader of the meeting, the sole purpose of the leader, was to listen attentively to everyone speaking around the rondavo or wherever they were sitting. And then at the end, the leader would only give a summary of the submissions, not his own opinion. And that had an unquestionable influence on Madiba's own ability to listen. And that is something I picked up from him and from the Xhosa culture. That ability to listen to every single word a person is saying, and to read every single word, for understanding and reading between the lines, and trying to comprehend fully what the story is telling you. And it's opened my life to so many things. And now with smartphones, people tend to not listen to understand; they listen to respond. And it's creating a big problem for people in communication, even in the workplace as well, where we only listen to half of the story because we want to be the smartest in the room. We want to sound, knowledgeable about any subject without listening what the other person is really saying. So,
That's such a good point. People just speak or listen to respond and not listen with genuine care. And I think, you hit the nail on the head with so many points there. And I think that in this attention-driven culture, where perhaps, yes, it's access to, of course, social media and quick videos, but then I think a layer deeper would perhaps be that those individuals are not being heard, be it from early childhood or at home with their partners or family and friends, and therefore there's this need to just speak over others when it comes to reality. And I think that there is something deeper there. Do you think that throughout your experience with Mr. Mandela, did he expect anything from you? And the context of this question is, I'm the founder and CEO of a business, and there's individuals around me, and I expect them to show up and be the best version of themselves on a daily basis and give it their all and just go for it and do things that have not been done before. That's like kind of the context of this.
yes, nice, and definitely he expected people, to be honorable. I think first and foremost, in his office, the people that worked around him. He expected people to be loyal, but not aversely so. He expected you to speak up when you had a difference in opinion, or when you saw that something, or you didn't agree with something, because as I said earlier, he seeked out that divergence. So he wanted people with independent minds around him, because that helped him make big decisions. So he expected us to be at show up every day and be the best that you can be. But more importantly, not to lose your individuality and not to be sucked up into just following something blindly. He wanted you to question things and to understand things properly before you did them. And I think that was a very big part of his the office culture. Is that he seeked out that very many different opinions on things, because he found that very helpful.
And I also read in your book that you attended his funeral and you wrote about it. And I guess the question I had was, what do you think he wanted for the ones around him? And And, of course, like we can speak about all these traits and these principles that he implanted in a nation. But if you had to summarize it, what would it be?
I think he would have wanted us all to look. He always said, when people said to him, how would you like to be remembered? He always shied away from answering the question and saying to people, I would like to leave it to others to decide how they remember me. And because we worked for him, or because people were close to him, there was never any different rules for some people in Nelson Mandela's life to others. It was the consistency of his leadership, of his style, of his personality, shone very, very bright throughout his life. So he would also leave it to us to decide how we want to be remembered. And I think he wanted us, he would have expected us just to be at peace with ourselves. And if I can take that more on a personal level, at peace with the fact that I tried my best for him. I did my best. I was completely committed to him for 19 years. There was no other agenda. I always had his interest at heart, and I did the best for him that I could. So I think, he was satisfied with that. And for other people and for his loved ones and so on, I think he would also want them to be at peace with each other and at peace with the world. It's a huge responsibility carrying association with the Nelson Mandela legacy. And it's a very complicated environment to move in. And throughout the world, if you look at other situations, the Clinton family, the Martin Luther King family, all these big figures in life, it's a very, very complicated environment that you operate in. So there will be trouble, and there will be differences of opinions, because also no two people are ever the same. But I think he would want us to remember the Nelson Mandela that we knew and that I knew personally, which was a kind and considerate and respectful human being, always choosing what was best for others and not just best for himself. And I think he would wanted us all to act in a way like that.
And you spoke about association, and I think I would define it as, or kind of summarize this concept as identity. And we essentially identify with what we do. If you meet someone and they happen to be an engineer, I'm sure in the first 30 seconds they're going to say, hi, my name is John and I'm an engineer. So how do we not identify with what we do and separate that from who we are?
I think it's very difficult to do that, Nelson, because I think essentially what we do, as you say, is part of our identity. If you also, many people have said to me, or not they say to me, they comment on social media, oh, we wanted to forget, not to mention experiences, we are tired of her stories, it's just facetious people. But, then I think to myself, well, if you can erase 19 years in your life, then it's fine. Then we can all erase 19 years in our lives, and then we won't refer to the time period. It's not possible. So it's inextricably part of your identity, what you do. It is what you do with what you have that's important to me. So if you say introduce yourself as an engineer, what are you doing outside just engineering, and the power and the knowledge that you have to help in other ways? Are you helping at your school where there's an engineer kind of opinion needed on things? Are you helping at your kids' school with that? Are you helping at the local charity where there's some kind of a set skill that you have needed? So that what you do can't be, for me, separated from your identity, but it's what you do in addition to what counts for me. It's not only a career; it is really how you add value to people around you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the context of the question is, once you've done with that specific career, then what? And I think that that's how midlife crisis comes about, and people essentially lose their identity and not know who they are. And I think he's made such a good point about you're more than just what you do. You are the person that's helping at the charity. You are a family member, a friend, a partner, whatever it may be. You're so much more. And I think that's like the seeds that I'm trying to like get across with that identity part. And of course, like identity can also serve us, right? Because we can frame it in a way that is empowering to us. So if I'm like, hey, I'm an entrepreneur and I do X, Y, and Z, like that's very broad. And I know that it makes me happy and I'm able to do good work for others. And I think that's at the core of it. So like, yeah, that was kind of the context. And I think another, just tying into this perhaps is also having that empathy for ourselves and not thinking that we have to do so much and compare ourselves to others and compare ourselves to these, great people. Did you ever struggle with that comparison aspect of things?
Absolutely. Nice. And sometimes long in the 2000s and thereafter, the year 2000 and thereafter, Madiba would sometimes say to me that he misses prison. And I would say to him, you shouldn't say that, you shouldn't let people hear that you miss prison. And then he would laugh at me and say, no, it's not that I miss prison, the institution. What I miss is having time to think. And, very few of us really take the time in this very, very busy and difficult environment that we live in, where our lives are really being controlled by electronics all the time. You can't sit still for 5 minutes without picking up your phone. And that is what Madiba meant, is that he wanted just an hour a day to think about his problems without reading newspapers, without doing anything, without being interrupted. And I think especially people in the working environment need to make that time for themselves. Some people escape through exercise, they go cycling, and that gives them that hour of thinking because you concentrate on something completely different. So there's those outlets that you can have, but sometimes just to sit, for a few minutes and just to think about a problem will bring so many new solutions, because that is what Madiba wanted. And then in that, thinking about yourself, am I doing the best for me? Because we all hear these words about self-care and work-life balance and so on, and in reality, it's not always possible, to follow all these all this advice that you get from people. But you always need to think of, what am I doing for myself? What am I doing also? Is this the best career path for me? What am I sacrificing, and am I willing to sacrifice for where I'm heading? So, it was the same with me. For 19 years, I didn't have a private life. Today, it's 11 years later after that 19 years. And I still, I didn't have a family or so on, but I'm still a daughter to two parents, and I'm still a sister to my brother. So, those roles are very important to me, and making time for that, because, you need to understand. And when you speak about identity, who is it that you want to be? Helping in my community and being there for people and doing certain charitable things will always be part of my life. So it's finding a balance between, do I have the luxury of the money to step out and do certain things that's just for myself, or do I need to work at a particular pace until I have the luxury of doing something? Madiba always believed also that charity doesn't have to cost money. It can be just to check up on someone that you care about, or someone that may be lonely. And that was the establishment of Mandela Day. That was the idea behind that every day we can do one good deed at least, and it doesn't have to cost money. So, it's finding a balance between all these things, because also I felt that when I do things like this, I feel, enriched in a way that nothing else gives me that satisfaction than when I'm meaningful to another person's life. So don't forget all of that in the crazy, world that we live in now, in this fast-paced world. Always do something that's meaningful to you as a human being as well.
And you mentioned a lot of things there, but I just want to touch on this point about outlets, because I think that it's something that I also struggle with. Just being and doing nothing. Like, it's super difficult for me to do nothing, but I know the benefit of it. because when I'm, out in nature, walks with my partner, going to the beach, and like just being and doing something that's different from the day to day, that's when like the best ideas come about. That's when like I have the most amount. I just feel free, right?
Mm.
For you, how have you come to the point where you are okay with doing nothing?
It's difficult, I must be honest with you, because I'm a slave of my phone like everyone else, and of technology like everyone else. But I make a point of, I live in a beautiful part of South Africa in the Overstrand, and I make a part of going out into nature because here you have the luxury of living close to nature. So I make a point of going out in nature every single day, even if it's just in my garden or then taking a walk early in the morning where I'm just by myself, because I need that reflection. I'm also, kind of an introvert, by nature, so I need downtime away from people. And unless I do that, I become a very difficult person to live with. So I need that downtime for myself and for my own well-being, and therefore I force it into my schedule. It's difficult to just sit, at home and find time because there's so many distractions. You have to do washing, you have to do this, but I force myself to go out into nature. And we live in such a beautiful country with the most wonderful climate, and even if it's just in your garden, to go and sit there for 5 minutes and just break the cycle of this, over being so overwhelmed with information all the time. I think it's very, very important. Madiba also had, he had massages, body massages every second day of his life, every second day, no matter where we were in life. And he considered that also as part of his downtime, just for an hour. Of course, as he got older, it was to do with blood circulation and movement and so on, and sore muscles because he couldn't walk any longer, or he couldn't walk, for exercise any longer. So it was very important to his health. But just when you lie down there on a massage bed, you can't think of anything else than the person, that's working here on you, and it's a way of relaxation. So whatever you choose to do, if it's walking, if it's cycling, if it's playing tennis or whatever people do, it's very important just to take a little time every day out for yourself, especially people who live in a high pressured environment. Madiba always said to me that, he doesn't think that Oliver Tambo had enough massages in his life because he was so highly strained, and the pressure of that role was all consuming. So he was very worried about Uncle Oliver's state, and so it was very important to him to also take out that time.
Yeah, and I think it's also being kinder to ourselves. Um, with the excess responsibilities of life and the demands. And this, kind of goes into something that you also speak about in your book, which is forgiveness. And, the example about, Mandela, when he was released from prison, inviting his jailers over and, essentially forgiving them. What have you learned about forgiveness? And I mean, examples could be people that are attacking you online. How are you able to, get to that point of forgiveness?
You have to be at peace with yourself. There's certain relationships and people, that you can't rescue, for the sake of, you can't recover certain things that's happened. Madiba also had his boundaries, and boundaries are very, very important. But forgiving yourself, first of all, for allowing yourself to be in a situation like that where you are exposed, I think, that's the first thing, to forgive yourself for a certain situation. I struggle with, interpersonal relationships like everyone else. Just because I worked for Madiba doesn't mean that I've perfected the art of personal relationships. But for me, forgiveness is also being at peace. It doesn't mean that I always have to have a relationship with a person, but you have to let go of another person's throat, as they say.
Mm. In this season of your life, what drives you? What keeps you going? And what excites you?
Well, for me, what excites me is South Africa, where we are as a country right now, today, on this day in February 2025. I do think that where we are politically, there's a lot to be excited about. We just heard the president's opening of parliament, a State of the Nation speech, and looking at the reaction from people and such a vast variety of people commenting. Some may not be good, but just people are invested in this country. So many people want to make this country work, and that excites me. The ordinary man in the street also wants to make this country work, but they need leadership from people. And we feel now, at last again, that we all belong in this country because there's relatedness. And that thing that Madiba was so well known for as well, there's relatedness in our government, irrespective of ideological differences, perhaps. So that excites me. And then personally, I carry this extraordinary experience and privilege of having been a first witness to the legacy of Nelson Mandela, having worked so close with him for 19 years. And I want to continue sharing that experience, because I do feel that we are at a time where the world actually needs to be reminded that there once was this human being, the most revered statesman and humanitarian of our lives. And he was an ordinary human being. So I want to create that relatedness for people again, so that they feel that they knew him. I also feel, and I write it in my book, that as time passes, things change and people put interpretation on things. And I want to make sure that people get a first-hand witness experience of Madiba for as long as I'm able to. So for me, that is a personal dream, to continue to do what I do now and meet the most wonderful people along the way who all have Madiba stories to tell me. And, it keeps me connected to him and connected to his legacy as well.
Yeah, that's such a good point about people's interpretations as time goes on. There's been many books that have been passed that have been changed due to people's interpretations. And that's a good point. Zelda, the last part of the podcast is called the fast fire. So I'm going to ask you these quick questions, and if you could answer in a word or short sentence, that would be perfect.
Sure.
What's your hope for people who read your books?
Insight.
Okay, insight into?
Insight into Madiba's life.
If you were president for a day, what's one rule you would make in South Africa that everyone has to follow?
I want to say no jaywalking. No, the one rule is law-abiding citizens. Yeah, let's just leave it that. I would want people just to abide by the law, everyone.
If you could leave behind only 3 lessons, when it's your time to move on 100 years from now, what would those lessons be?
Compassion, empathy, and respect.
For people to apply that daily. What's something that you want to detach from and not take into 2025 and beyond?
The negativity or the notion that everything is broken in South Africa. It's not.
One piece of advice or wisdom to younger Zelda?
Hope is a choice. If Nelson Mandela could remain hopeful for 18 of the 27 years in that small prison cell, how dare we not choose hope?
That's amazing. Zelda, thank you. This was super insightful. Thank you for sharing all these stories with me, and also for the impact that you're making, with your books and writing these wonderful lessons filled with, first-hand experience. So much wisdom that, people should, of course, read and apply into their own lives. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for giving me your time today.
Thank you, Nelson. It's very nice chatting to you, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you.